A recent request was a recipe for crisp bread. Crisp bread is called Knäckebrot in Germany, and it comes originally from Sweden, but we like Knäckebrot or crisp bread a lot, and we have many different varieties. I grew up with crisp bread. I like it very much, but I've never made it myself. So I had to research a little bit, and most of the recipes that I found were with lots of grains and seeds and very rough in structure. But I was looking for a kind of crisp bread that I know from my childhood that was with rye flour and rather with a fine textures. So I finally found something like that on a Swiss website. It's called Streusel, CH, and I will try this recipe today, and you can watch me while doing it, and I hope it turns out good. So the ingredients are rather simple. You need 200 grams of rye flour. Then you need 10 grams of baking powder, which is 2 teaspoons, 20 grams of sesame seeds, and 6 grams of salt. Then you also need 280 milliliters of water, although I think I will need less water because the recipe that I found is not asking for rye flour, it's asking for a rather rough rye flour, so this is more fine than what she was using in her recipe, so I will be careful with the water. Yeah, and then later you will need some additional sesame seeds and some additional rye flour. You will also need a cookie sheet with a parchment paper on it, and this cookie sheet should fit into your freezer. So if you have a small freezer, you might need a smaller baking sheet for that, or maybe 2. Okay, let's start. So first, I mix the water with the rye flour. And as I mentioned before, I will be rather careful. If you need to know how much water this is in cups, it's about a cup and a quarter cup. The exact measurements are on the blog post in metric and also in US customary measurements. That looks good, I think. I think this will be working out with the amount of water. Let's see. I'm also adding the salt, and I'm not adding the baking powder yet. Okay, and once this is mixed, I have to put this onto the baking sheet. So let me put this aside. And I need to spread it out on the baking sheet and try to make it as even as possible. Okay, so this looks quite even here. The lady who came up with this recipe, I think she really figured it out by herself. Her name is Judith. And so she found out that the Swedes used crushed ice or probably snow, I don't know, to make this crisp bread, to give it a little more fluff. I could have used crushed ice. I have it here in my fridge. Many people here in Texas have that, but since not everyone around the world can relate to that, I decided to make it just the way that that lady did it. So now this goes into the freezer for about half an hour, but I will have to check in between. This should be frozen, but not frozen hard all the way through. So it should still be bendable, but kind of frozen. So that's what I'm going for. All right, so see you in a little bit. So the 30 minutes in the freezer were pretty accurate. You see, I can still bend this, and I will put this into my mixing bowl now. in pieces, and then I will quickly mix this and try to get as much air into it as possible. So in some areas it's still a little bit too soft. Let's see. Yeah, the center is still a little bit soft, but I think it works. I have to repeat this step anyway, so this is not the only time I'm doing this. So here in the center you see it is very soft. It probably would have been better to let it freeze for a little longer, but I'll just go with it. All right, so this has to be a quick mix with a high speed so that it doesn't completely melt. Okay, so now I will again put this onto the parchment paper and again into the freezer for 30 minutes. And here a little tip from the person who works a lot with rye: wash the equipment pretty fast, because once rye mass gets dried, it is awfully hard to clean it. Okay, and since the center wasn't very well frozen in the first attempt to freeze this, I've now decided to make the center a little thinner of a layer than the outer edges. So I hope this will help. Let's see. Let's put it back into the fridge again. So here comes the second round to mix this up, and this time I will add the baking powder. But first I have to break this and put it into the bowl. So I think this time I let it in a little longer. I had the center be a little thinner than the outer edges. It's a little bit uneven, I have to admit that, but I think it's very hard to really get it even, and I'm not sure if it really makes so much of a difference. So we'll find out soon, I guess. I have to work quickly here again, so that the ice crystals in this bread don't melt too much. So I will again mix it with a high speed for about 2 minutes. So, and I'm also adding the baking powder now. Okay, that seems to be enough. It was maybe more a minute than 2 minutes. All right, so again, parchment paper, and again, spreading this on the parchment paper. And because this has to go fast, I've already preheated the oven to 200 degrees Celsius, which is 392 degrees Fahrenheit. So this time I'm really trying to spread it as evenly as possible, also as thin as possible. And I'm trying to really get a rectangular shape so I can easily cut it later into rectangles. The goal here is I have a crisp bread box from Germany that I want to fill with this. But you can, of course, also make a round shape with a hole in the center. You've probably seen that from Swedish crisp bread. And if you do it that way, you can basically hang it with a thread somewhere to stay dry. Okay, I think this looks good. And this will now go into the oven for first 10 minutes, and I leave a spoon in the oven door to keep it a little bit open so that the evaporated water can leave the oven. So it's basically a little more a drying process than a baking process. After 10 minutes, I will have to take it out, do a little bit with it, and then put it back in. So don't turn off the oven. You will have to continue baking after the following step. I just realized that I forgot one step, so I have to sprinkle this with the additional rye flour now. Luckily, I noticed that before it was baking for more than a minute, so I guess I'm still good here. So this goes onto the spreaded mass. And also the sesame seeds. And I'll press this on a little bit. Okay, and quickly back into the oven. Now, after 10 minutes, I take this out and I have to poke holes into this now. So I'm just going through it with my fork. I'm not sure what these holes are for, if they're supposed to release more of the steam when the crisp bread dries, maybe. That would be my assumption. Okay, and then also I have to already cut it into smaller pieces, and for my Knäckebrot-Dose, for my tin for the crisp bread, I've already made some sort of little template. So this is the width that I need. And you can just use a regular pizza cutter or a knife to cut this here. And this cutting will help me later to break these into their final shape. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, now the other direction. So I'll have some smaller ones, apparently. That's fine. And let me just make sure that this one's going to fit into the tin later too. Okay, so now it goes back into the oven and I will bake it for about 35 minutes. Oh, and again with a spoon in the oven door to let the steam out. Okay, so this has been in the oven now for a little more than 30 minutes or 35 minutes. I think it was more like on the 45 minutes side. Probably my crisp bread is a little thicker than it was supposed to be, I'm not sure. However, so I was continuing to bake until it felt kind of crisp on the top everywhere. And then I turned off the oven and opened the oven door and let the crisp bread completely cool down. So it's really cold now. And you can see I can remove it from the parchment paper and easily break it into separate crisp breads. Probably should have put the sesame a little farther inside the dough. It seems to fall off easily. So something that the lady from the other blog said was that if your crisp bread is still a little bit soft once you've cooled it, you can put it back into the oven and dry it for a little longer. And the other thing you can do is that you put it into the toaster. Okay, but it doesn't seem to be necessary here. So I can see that this is all really crisp. You can hear probably when I break some part off, like this. And so let's see if it fits into my tin here. Yeah. It looks good so far. This one's a little thick. Okay. So yeah, this is what it's like. So let me try one of these. So I have some butter. This tastes exactly like the crisp bread that I had in my childhood. It's very good. Yes, I really like this. I like it very much to eat this with some butter and some honey, but it's also amazing with some ham, cheese, of course, too. Often people in Germany eat this as a weight loss diet and just with a little bit of margarine or some quark on it. Sometimes some ricotta cheese or something like that. I like it really best with some honey, to be honest. Now, I hope you liked this video. Thank you for watching, and if you stay tuned, you can watch another video from me in just a few seconds.